In this episode, we're going to make industry frameworks feel like helpful organizing tools instead of intimidating collections of rules. When you are brand new to cybersecurity and AI, it can feel like there are too many things to consider, and you might wonder how anyone keeps it all straight. Frameworks exist for that exact reason. They give you a structured way to think about security and governance, so you do not have to invent your own system from scratch every time a new problem appears. In AI security management, frameworks are especially valuable because the risks touch many areas at once, like data protection, accountability, compliance, and ongoing monitoring. The goal here is not to memorize every detail of a framework, but to understand what frameworks do, how they are used, and how they help you make consistent decisions that you can defend later. By the end, you should be able to explain why frameworks matter, how they connect to governance routines, and how they help translate big ideas into practical, repeatable work. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A framework is basically a map, and like any map, it does not tell you exactly what to do in every single moment, but it helps you avoid getting lost. In security, getting lost looks like focusing on the wrong risks, missing important controls, or making inconsistent decisions across teams. A framework gives you categories, vocabulary, and a way to connect actions to outcomes. It also helps different groups communicate, because if everyone uses the same structure, a security leader, a compliance leader, and a technical builder can talk about the same problem without constantly redefining terms. Beginners sometimes worry that frameworks are only for large companies, but even small teams benefit because a framework prevents chaotic, ad hoc security work. In AI governance, a framework can help you decide what must be addressed early, what must be monitored over time, and what evidence you need to prove you are acting responsibly. That is why exams like AAISM include frameworks, because they reflect real-world expectations for organized, defensible security management. One of the most common ways to use a framework is to organize your work into a life cycle of activities, like identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. You do not need to memorize those words to benefit from the concept. The basic idea is that security is not only about building protections, it is also about knowing what exists, noticing problems, and handling incidents. For AI systems, that life cycle mindset is especially useful because the system's behavior can change and because new types of harm can appear, like unsafe outputs or drift. If you only focus on protection, you might miss that you do not even know where AI systems are used or who owns them. If you only focus on detection, you might notice problems, but have no clear response process. A framework helps you remember that security must cover the full story from visibility to prevention to recovery. When exam questions ask what an organization should do to be mature and consistent, this broad life cycle thinking often points you toward a framework-based approach. Frameworks also help you separate governance decisions from implementation details, which is important for beginners. Governance is about setting expectations, defining roles, and requiring evidence, while implementation is how technical teams fulfill those expectations. A framework can provide a consistent set of control categories without forcing you to pick a specific tool or configuration step. For example, a framework might emphasize access control, logging, and change management as categories, and the organization decides how to implement them. In AI security, that means the governance program can require controls around data access, model change control, and output monitoring without dictating a specific technical solution. This separation keeps the program flexible, which matters because AI technology changes quickly. It also makes governance more scalable because you can apply the same control categories to many different systems. Exams often reward answers that establish clear categories and expectations rather than answers that jump into overly specific technical actions. A second major value of frameworks is that they create consistency across teams and across time. If one team uses its own homemade approach, another team uses a different approach, and a third team ignores structure entirely, the organization becomes inconsistent and harder to defend. Frameworks give you a common structure so governance reviews can be performed in a comparable way across different AI systems. This is important because AI systems may differ in purpose, but they still share common risks, such as data exposure, integrity issues, and accountability gaps. Consistency also helps with program management because you can track progress across the organization using a shared structure. For example, you can track which systems have completed assessments in certain categories or which systems lack monitoring controls in a specific area. Beginners should see frameworks as a way to reduce guesswork because they provide a checklist of categories to consider even when you are unsure. This is especially helpful when you are learning because the framework fills in gaps you might not think about yet. Frameworks also support a risk-based approach because they help you prioritize rather than treating everything as equally urgent. A mature governance program does not apply maximum control to every system because that slows adoption and encourages bypass. Instead, it uses risk tiering, and frameworks help define what controls become more important as risk increases. For example, a low-risk internal AI helper might need basic access control and logging, while a high-impact decision system might require stronger validation, deeper assessment, and more frequent monitoring. Framework categories help you scale controls logically. Beginners sometimes interpret frameworks as rigid rules, but in practice, frameworks are often applied with flexibility, guided by risk. That flexibility is important for AI governance because use cases vary widely, and one-size-fits-all does not work well. When exam questions involve prioritization, frameworks often guide the best answer by supporting a structured, risk-based scaling of controls. Now let's talk about how frameworks connect to evidence, because evidence is a big theme in AI security management. When an organization uses a framework, it can show that its security program is structured and aligned to recognized practices. This does not automatically guarantee safety, but it strengthens defensibility because decisions are not random. Evidence can include documented policies, completed assessments, control tests, audit trails of approvals, and records of monitoring and incident handling. Frameworks provide a way to label and organize that evidence so it is easier to find and easier to explain. For example, if a regulator or customer asks how you manage data protection in AI systems, you can point to the framework category that covers data protection and show the controls and tests associated with it. Without a framework, evidence is often scattered and hard to interpret. Beginners should understand that defensibility is not just about having documents. It is about having documents that are organized and connected to clear expectations. Frameworks help create that connection. A practical beginner way to think about specific frameworks is not by their names, but by what problem they help solve. Some frameworks focus on cybersecurity management broadly, helping you organize identity, access, monitoring, incident response, and recovery. Some frameworks focus on governance and control, helping you define decision rights, accountability, and oversight. Some standards focus on management systems, which means they emphasize consistent processes, continuous improvement, and evidence that processes are followed. In AI governance, you might use a broad cybersecurity framework to ensure your AI systems fit into the organization's security practices, and you might use a governance-oriented framework to ensure decision-making is consistent and accountable. You might also use AI-specific guidance to address issues like model risk, fairness, and transparency. The key is that you are choosing frameworks as building blocks, not choosing a single framework as the only answer. Exams often test that you understand frameworks are used to create organization and consistency, not to replace thinking. Frameworks can also help you communicate with different audiences, which is important because governance is a social system as much as a technical one. Executives want to know that the organization is not taking reckless risk and that decisions can be defended. Technical teams want clear requirements and categories so they can implement controls efficiently. Compliance teams want traceability from obligations to controls to evidence. A framework provides a shared language for these conversations, reducing misunderstandings. For example, when a security leader says the program covers identification, protection, detection, and response, executives can understand that the program is comprehensive. When a technical team hears that logging and monitoring are required categories, they can build accordingly. When compliance teams see that controls align to recognized categories, they can plan audits and evidence collection. Beginners should realize that the same decision can be explained differently depending on the audience, and frameworks offer a neutral structure that supports those explanations. That neutrality helps prevent governance discussions from becoming personal opinions. One challenge to understand is that frameworks can be misused, and the exam may test whether you recognize that risk. A common misuse is treating framework alignment as the goal rather than using it to reduce real risk. Another misuse is checking boxes without verifying that controls actually work, which creates a false sense of security. Another misuse is applying a framework in a rigid way that slows work unnecessarily, causing teams to bypass governance. Good AI security management uses frameworks as tools, not as trophies. It uses them to ask better questions, create consistent routines, and ensure evidence is maintained. Beginners should be careful not to assume that citing a framework automatically makes a decision correct. The exam often rewards answers that include practical steps like assessment, validation, and monitoring, alongside framework alignment, because that combination is more defensible. Frameworks provide structure, but structure must be connected to action. A useful mental exercise for beginners is to pick a simple AI use case and map it to framework categories in your head. Imagine an AI assistant that summarizes internal documents and ask what the identify category would include, such as inventory, ownership, and data classification. Ask what the protect category would include, such as access control to documents, restrictions on who can use the assistant, and safeguards against exposing sensitive content. Ask what detect would include, such as monitoring for unusual usage patterns or outputs that contain sensitive terms. Ask what respond would include, such as escalation to incident response and evidence collection if sensitive output appears. Ask what recover would include, such as updating controls, retraining users, and validating that the system is safe again. You are not implementing anything. You are practicing structured thinking. This kind of mapping builds exam readiness because many questions are essentially asking which category of work is missing in a scenario. As we wrap up, industry frameworks are valuable because they organize complex AI governance and security work into clear categories that support consistency, communication, and defensible evidence. They help you remember that security is a life cycle, not a single control, and they help you scale oversight based on risk. They provide shared language across executives, compliance, security, and technical teams, which makes governance decisions smoother and less arbitrary. Frameworks also support evidence collection by linking controls and documentation to recognize structures, which matters when regulators, customers, or leaders ask how you manage AI risk. For a beginner, the most important takeaway is that frameworks are maps that prevent you from getting lost, especially when new technology and new obligations create uncertainty. When you use a framework well, you are not just following rules, you are building a predictable, repeatable way to make safe AI decisions that the organization can stand behind.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.